The strange but true story featured on this podcast contains details some people may find unsettling. Listener discretion is advised. I'm Chyaz Samuel, and things are about to get weird. Hi friends, welcome or indeed welcome back to Things Are About to Get Weird. This is a podcast where we delve into strange stories of all kinds, and it felt like a good while since we ventured over to the spookier side of things, so that's our destination for today. This episode topic was a suggestion from Simon, one of our fab listeners, and Simon asked whether I'd ever looked into the ghostly goings-on at the place some refer to as the most haunted castle in Wales, Craig-Y-Nos. It's not somewhere I knew a lot about, but as soon as I did some preliminary research, I was hooked. There are some seriously chilling tales associated with Craig-Y-Nos, and I knew I just had to share them with you. A couple of quick warnings before we begin. There will be some mentions of illness and death relating to young people in this episode. And additionally, one of the stories does involve a mention of a person taking their own life. So I wanted to let you know about all of that up front. But those warnings given, let's get started. Picture this, a beautiful Gothic castle complete with turrets and stunning greenery within its front courtyard, often used as a romantic wedding venue with gorgeous views out over the Brecon Beacons National Park. It's home to an opulent theatre, manicured grounds, and a whole host of ghosts, or so many believe. Located around 20 miles from Swansea, Craig-Y-Nos Castle attracts not only those wishing to tie the knot or have a mini break in the Welsh countryside, but routinely receives visits from people seeking out sightings of spirits and wishing to learn more about the fascinating and somewhat dark history of this iconic building. Not to mention the odd television crew. The castle actually featured in a 2004 episode of the legendary show Most Haunted, where the fabulous Yvette Fielding and crew turned up to see whether they would encounter any of the hotel's infamous permanent residents. I'm going to introduce you to some of the most interesting spooky tales from the castle shortly, but first I think it's well worth heading back in time to explore the place's history, as, like with many haunted locations, the events that have shaped the place often crop up within the ghost stories associated with it, and there's certainly no shortage of intriguing details to discuss when it comes to Craig-Y-Nos. Now, although the castle looks very old, it's actually only moderately old by Welsh castle standards. The main building was constructed by Captain Rhys Davies Powell, with the works completed in 1843. If we're being truthful, it doesn't actually fit the technical definition of a castle. It's more of an in-name-only situation, but hey, who am I to judge? It was passed down through Captain Powell's family until it was sold for the first time to the Morgan family in 1876, but their ownership of the castle only lasted for a couple of years. In 1878, we meet Craig-Y-Nos' most famous custodian, the renowned Spanish-born Italian opera singer Adelina Patti. For a little context of just how much of a big deal Adelina was at the time, she actually spent 25 years of her life singing for Queen Victoria by private invitation, so she would have been unbelievably well connected on top of being highly respected within her profession. In fact, it's said that Adelina was actually the highest earning opera singer of the 19th century, so her going on to purchase Craig-Y-Nos Castle as her home makes a lot of sense. It's believed that she had a truly deep love for the property, so it's perhaps not surprising that Adelina will be making further appearances within this episode. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because we still have to discuss one of the most fascinating areas of the castle's history. When Adelina sadly passed away in September of 1919, both the castle and the grounds were actually sold to the Welsh National Memorial Trust. Now, this was an organisation which was created to help fight one of the biggest healthcare crises of the day, which was, of course, tuberculosis. Craig-Y-Nos Castle was converted into a sanatorium, which received its first patients in 1922, and the difference between this and other hospitals dedicated to treating those with TB is that the castle focused on children and teenagers who were suffering from the infectious disease. In recent years, some of those who were treated at Craig-Y-Nos as children have spoken out about what it was like there. Many of these people are now very elderly, and thanks to an ITV documentary called The Children of Craig-Y-Nos, we were able to hear some of their stories firsthand. Many spoke about how they were separated from their families and taken to the castle, where many of them were faced with strict isolation, presumably because they were considered more infectious at that stage, and some were made to be out in the fresh air at all times, with their beds literally being placed on balconies regardless of the weather conditions, as it was thought that breathing fresh air was vital for them at all times. But despite the harshness of the conditions, which were enforced purely because the hospital staff were taking desperate measures to try and cure the children, many of them are thankful for their time at the castle and recognise that they likely wouldn't be alive today without the tough care they received there. Now, once the building had served its purpose as a TB hospital, it then became a care home for the elderly. The journalist and author Mark Rees summed it up well when he said this in an interview with the BBC. Quote, "It's a wonderful place, but it's also a place that has seen a heck of a lot of death." In the year 2000, the castle was sold to a commercial company who eventually decided to turn it into a hotel, which brings us to the purpose it's still used for to this day. So there's a very speedy overview of the history of the place. It will definitely be useful context as we go on today. And now I think it's about time for our first ghost tale. So let's kick things off in style by talking about the supposed spirit of Miss Adelina Patti herself. Since she passed away at Craig-Y-Nos in 1919, there have been reports of encounters with her presence in her beloved former home, including by some of the children who stayed there when it was a TB hospital. Remember the theatre I mentioned at the very start of the episode? Well, this gorgeous addition to the building was created by the opera singer to be her own personal auditorium to perform in. And today, the Adelina Patti Theatre is one of the only Grade 1 listed theatres in the UK and is most frequently used as the castle's wedding ceremony venue. It also happens to be the place where numerous sightings of a white lady spirit, thought to be Adelina, have been reported over the decades. Some of those who spent time at the hospital recall seeing this figure of a white lady frequently in one particular spot, the staircase that led to the stage within the theatre. These sightings weren't limited to cold, dark night times either. It's alleged that she's often spotted in the daytime, pacing up and down the staircase. But one story that's been reported by multiple people over the years isn't visual at all, but rather auditory. It's said that echoes of beautiful operatic singing can sometimes be heard throughout the castle's corridors, as though it's coming from the auditorium. But when the noise is followed, the theatre is always found to be empty. In a somewhat more chilling twist, some of the young hospital residents recalled waking up in the night to see the outline of the white lady standing at the foot of their bed, which, as someone who saw a white lady ghost myself when I was a child, sends shivers down my spine. In my encounter, I was just about to fall asleep when I saw the spirit from a distance, and that was enough for me. The very thought of it standing anywhere near my actual bed is terrifying. Now, although the majority of the accounts I can find describe Adelina's spirit as this benevolent presence, proximity to them aside, there have also been reports that imply some have felt a darker presence when they believe they've encountered her ghost. There have been several sightings of a shadowy female figure spotted lurking near the cellar staircase, which leads me on to a few additional details which could help us form some theories about this one. When Adelina passed away, her body was taken down to what is now called the slab room, located in the cellar. Here she was embalmed before her body was taken to Paris to be buried. Although Adelina loved Craig-Y-Nos, she specifically expressed her desire her to be laid to rest in Paris, as near as possible to the tomb of her favourite composer, Rossini, a man she had shared a great deal of mutual respect with in life. It was originally thought that, although this happened, Rossini's body was subsequently moved to Italy, and this made me wonder whether her spirit then grew angry and restless, hence the more malevolent presence some have experienced in the place where her body last lay in her home. There does seem to be some confusion with the dates in this story though. Some think that Rossini had actually already been moved when Adelina was buried. So perhaps take all of this with a pinch of salt. Of course, all of this completely depends on what you believe, and I'm just thinking out loud with this one, to be honest. But when I learned those extra details, it did make me wonder. Adelina will be making further appearances in this episode, but what I'm going to do now is switch to talking about certain areas of the castle at a time. So whilst we're in the cellar, I must tell you about something that cropped up during the filming of the 2004 Most Haunted episode. The team picked up on the presence of a man who they believed to be a real nasty piece of work. Some say that he could have been a former chef who worked at the castle at some point during its history, and others say that he seems to have a particular dislike of women, with several reporting that they have felt pushes and shoves from an unseen force whilst down in the cellar, but it doesn't appear that he's alone. Visitors to the cellar have reported encountering the spirits of two children, a boy and a girl, who it's thought could have passed away at the castle from tuberculosis when it was a hospital. Some guests have reported that the spirits seem playful and friendly, and have said that they felt gentle tugs on their clothing and their hair, but that there was no malice associated with it. I always find details like these in ghost stories really strange because whilst on the surface they feel sweet, you immediately then realise how incredibly tragic, incredibly sad it is. If you look into the castle for yourself, one name you're likely to come across in relation to the haunted happenings there is John Mellon. And for his story, we have to head up to the top floor of Craig-Y-Nos, to the room that is now referred to in his name. As the tale goes, during the time that Adelina Patti lived in the castle, she employed John Mellon as a gardener. At some point during his service, he met a housemaid by the name of Charlotte, and the two began a romantic relationship. Something that was very much frowned upon. The idea of two staff members being involved in this way was simply not tolerated at the time, knowing that if their relationship was discovered, John and Charlotte would likely both lose their jobs. The head housekeeper, who it's thought was related to Charlotte in some way, actually arranged for her to leave the castle by finding her a new job in London. Now, for some reason, all of this was sorted out without John Mellon having any idea what was going on. As far as he believed, when Charlotte departed the castle, the purpose had been to leave him and their love affair behind, not realising that she had done it to protect them both. It's said that in his despair, he actually took his own life, and that his spirit still resides in the room he died in. Over the years, several paranormal investigators have reported encounters in this space, many of which seem to point towards specific details in this story. For example, the medium Paul Sambach says that during a séance he was involved with in the room, a man on the tour became very emotional and began mumbling the name Charlotte. When those who were with him asked why he was saying that name, he replied that he had an overwhelmingly sad feeling that he was being broken up with by someone he loved. On another occasion, again during a séance, another man suddenly said that he had a horrible feeling that a rope was around his neck, and that he felt a wave of depression crash over him. Sally Morgan, the well-known psychic, also visited the room prior to becoming a television personality, and she too said that after being in there a while, she could feel a rope around her neck whilst the names John and Charlotte kept appearing in her mind. Additionally, during the Most Haunted filming, this was the same room where it was sensed that a child may have been pushed from a window, which is chilling in a whole new way. Whilst we don't have any further information about which event this could have related to, there is a sign within the castle that a man named John Mellon was once there. That very name is inscribed on one of the castle's turrets. Whether this is all genuine or whether the legend emerged as the result of someone seeing the inscription, it's impossible to say, but I found this detail interesting nonetheless. Now, seeing as we're already on the upper floors, let's discuss a few more of the spirits thought to inhabit this area. When the building was converted into the sanatorium, this space served as a TB hospital wing, so perhaps unsurprisingly, there have been plenty of strange happenings reported here. Shuffling footsteps and the laughs of children have been heard ringing out throughout the corridors of this floor, and some have sensed the presence of a man they believe to be a former doctor too. This area actually still contains some physical throwbacks to the time, including original light fittings on the walls, and one photo I saw of a room in this section of the building also appeared to have some old chairs, candlesticks, and even religious objects in too. I know that some people believe that spirits can latch onto physical items, so this could be something to think about here. But regardless, it doesn't appear that anyone is suggesting these spirits are unkind or troublesome. If anything, they're once again more frequently described as being friendly and playful. Moving along, a couple of the castle's bedrooms in particular have developed quite the spooky reputation. First and foremost, the infamous room 36. This is a bedroom where it's thought that one of the most haunted team members saw a full-body apparition of a woman believed to be Adelina Patti. She walked through an invisible opening in the wall into what would have once been the chapel and is now the bridal suite. Visitors searching for a ghostly encounter often book room 36 for the night to see what they experience themselves, though it's said that Adelina's spirit has not been spotted in here since the furniture was rearranged. Then there's room 21. Online reviews left by people who have stayed in this room describe incidents including the wardrobe doors opening and closing by themselves, having their face and feet touched by spirits in the night, and even being dragged out of bed by an unseen presence. To me, this room feels much more active in a paranormal sense than room 36, so I'll be intrigued to see whether some further accounts about happenings in these spaces are still yet to come to light. Let's move now to the castle's kitchen, which, according to an article on the website spookyisles.com, played host to a more amusing paranormal moment. A few years ago, a journalist stood in the kitchen speaking with the current owner, Martin Gover, when a specific subject came up in their conversation: the fact that Adelina Patti had never quite been able to master the performance of Carmen in the opera of the same name. It's thought that within her life and career, this was one of her very few, if not her only, low points. Here's what the article said happened next. In the next moment, a large cast iron saucepan flew from the range on the floor with a crash, and the owner exclaimed, "She isn't happy." One thing is certain, Madame Patti had not lost her diva spirit. I loved this, and at the end of the day, Adelina was a superstar of her time, so a bit of diva behaviour from beyond the grave doesn't seem too out of place. And speaking of Adelina's performances, let's go back and take a closer look at her theatre. One tale that I loved about this space goes like this. During a performance in the theatre after Adelina's passing, a young girl was about to step onto the stage to sing. She was clearly nervous, and while she was hesitating and hanging back in the wings, a woman appeared beside her dressed in black and said, "Don't worry, you'll sing your best today." After the show, the young girl went backstage to try and find the lady and thank her, but she was nowhere to be seen and no one seemed to know who the girl was talking about. It was only when she told some older members of the show's cast what she had experienced that they realised she may have had an encounter with the theatre's most most famous ghost, Miss Patti herself. I thought this was quite sweet and it reminded me of something else I read about the theatre. There's somewhat of an urban legend that's formed over the years that if you were to sing or play Adelina's song Home Sweet Home while standing in the theatre, that it would actually summon her spirit to you. I'm not sure I'd be brave enough to try it, to be honest, but there's something I loved about that too. Finally, for the theatre, there was another account I came across which also involves the castle's owner, Martin. Not long after his company purchased the property, he'd locked and bolted the doors to the auditorium whilst he was inside preparing the space for an upcoming conference. He was up on the stage practicing a speech he was due to give and didn't want to be disturbed, when he suddenly felt as though he was being watched, like there was a presence with him in the room. Shortly afterwards, he heard the sound of the auditorium doors creaking open of their own accord, despite being locked, and when he went to see what had happened, there was no one there. It's worth saying though that Martin has always felt this spirit is kind and more happy to be witnessing the theatre being used again than anything else. The final area of the castle I wanted to tell you about today is the conservatory. Now this is a particularly fascinating space because it was significant in both Adelina's day and whilst the castle was a hospital, but the contrast between the two eras is quite chilling. When Adelina was alive, the conservatory was adorned with the finest furniture, plush drapes and expensive ornaments, and at one point was also used as a dining room and entertainment space, whereas in later years it served as a children's TB ward and would have been the place where so many young people tragically lost their lives. Many ghost hunters and mediums who have visited the conservatory tend to have more melancholy encounters there, including Bill Harrison from the group known as Ghostwatch, who said that he could hear echoes of children and babies crying out, which is heartbreaking. In more recent years, however, this area hasn't been as much of a focal point for ghost hunters, possibly because there's so much else to see within the castle. Although the conservatory is sadly associated with some of the children who were never able to leave Craig-Y-Nos, their spirits are more notably said to be elsewhere in the building. For example, in the basement area of the theatre, there's thought to be the ghost of a young girl named Elizabeth who passed away from tuberculosis. She's a gentle and friendly spirit by all accounts, but it's impossible to think about tales like this without acknowledging the cloud of tragedy that hangs over them. The castle's history is so varied and its hauntings so widely discussed that they've actually chosen to really embrace it. Craig-Y-Nos offers guided ghost tours, where enthusiasts can book onto anything from 3-hour tours, which include seances, to overnight stays and full-on paranormal investigations too. I have to say that despite being a scaredy cat myself, I could see a situation in which I'd be tempted to visit and take part in one of them. Whether I could bring myself to then stay overnight after being inevitably scared silly is another matter, but I think it's great that the hotel really gets on board with it all. There are countless videos on YouTube of paranormal enthusiasts visiting the castle and recording their experiences, so if you're interested, there are loads of clips you can watch over there. There was one last thing I just had to mention before we end today. Remember the very first owner of the castle that I mentioned at the start, Captain Powell? Well, it turns out that there's an intriguing bit of folklore surrounding his family that could add a whole other spooky layer to the history of the property. It's believed that the Powell family had a curse placed upon them prior to the building of Craig-Y-Nos. The story behind this curse is very confusing and difficult to find information on, but it's said to have something to do with another family, the Overbeck or Overbeeks. Some think that whatever the backstory was, Captain Powell and his loved ones had been doomed from that moment on. It's said that he lost 3 of his children, as well as his brother and sister, whilst the castle was being built. Then, shortly after it was completed, another son of his passed away, with both his wife and daughter dying before his own passing in 1862. A couple of years years later, his eldest son was killed in a hunting accident, and the castle was passed to his eldest daughter Sarah and her husband Captain Allway. It wasn't long before Allway also perished, and Sarah, possibly sensing that the curse was somehow connected to the castle, moved away before selling the place, and I must say I can't blame her. I haven't seen any mentions of this supposed curse in relation to any of the other owners of Craig-Y-Nos. It seems that it was only linked to the original family, but I thought it was a spooky footnote worth mentioning. As often happens with stories I cover, I got to the end of my research and found myself feeling quite drawn to the castle. I've put it firmly on my places to visit list, because regardless of how you feel about the ghostly aspects of these stories, it's hard to deny that the history of this location is quite something. I would certainly keep my wits about me whilst walking around the building. I have no doubt that I'd automatically be a bit jumpy, but I can pretty confidently say that I would love to experience the place and discover whether I think Craig-Y-Nos could really be the most haunted castle in Wales. Well, what a roller coaster of a story that was to look into. It was at times as incredibly sad as it was completely intriguing, and I can't wait to visit the castle for myself. Have you ever been to Craig-Y-Nos? Or is there another castle in Wales you think deserves the title of most haunted? On the flip side, are you much more of a skeptic and think there are probably more rational explanations for the encounters people have had there? One of my favourite parts of any episode is hearing your thoughts and opinions on the topic, so don't hesitate to get in touch and get involved in the conversation. You know the drill by now. I'll be letting you know about all of the ways that you can get in touch shortly. But for now, it's time for our outro feature. Here is Weird Media. Okay, bear with me for this weird media recommendation, because I'm about to do something I don't think I've done before, and that is shouting out a TV show that's a continuation of one I've already told you about in this feature, but I promise you it's worth it. It's beyond worth it. So back in episode 61, I mentioned how much I loved the sequel to the original Dexter series, which was called New Blood, and I absolutely stand by that. I thought they did a great job on it, but what I didn't know at the time was that they were about to drop something that would take the world of Dexter to an entirely new level, in my opinion. The prequel, Original Sin. I should just say at this point, if you're not familiar with Dexter, it's a drama series which centers around the titular character who is a serial killer. But there are a couple of twists. One is that he lives a normal life working as a blood spatter analyst for the police force in Miami, and two, that he lives by a code which means he can only kill people who, in his mind, deserve it. And most often, those people are murderers or even serial killers themselves. I've known that the prequel was on the cards for a while, and after enjoying New Blood so much, I had high hopes for it. But I'm not exaggerating when I say it surpassed every single expectation I had and then some. I almost don't know where to start. The casting was perfection. It was so good that it had me questioning whether they'd actually de-aged some of the original actors for characters like Angel Batista, because they were just spot on. Patrick Gibson plays the younger Dexter, with Michael C. Hall still providing that classic Dexter voiceover, with Christian Slater as his dad Harry and Molly Brown as Deb. I could go on and on about the cast, with people like Patrick Dempsey and Sarah Michelle Gellar playing fantastic roles, but take it as read that they are all brilliant. What really gets me about the show most of all is how a prequel with a totally different cast can not only embody the feel and vibe of the original to a T, but in some ways surpass it, to the point where I think you could watch Original Sin even if you've never seen Dexter, still enjoy it completely, then go back to watch the original series. I love being able to recommend programs like this, where it feels accessible to viewers new and old, as long as you don't mind things getting a bit gory, of course. Just like the original and the sequel, the prequel has its fair share of blood and gore. If you're a Dexter fan who has watched Original Sin, please let me know what you made of it. I'm already keeping my fingers crossed for the announcement of a Series 2. Okay, time now for our Saw shoutouts. The website mosthauntedcastle.com, which is dedicated to Craig-Y-Nos, was endlessly helpful, as was the Craig-Y-Nos-Castle.com website. There was an ITV news article about the amazing group of TB survivors and their search for one another as adults. We had a BBC news piece by Nicola Bryan about haunted Welsh castles. That was from October 2022. An article on the same topic from The Independent by Amelia Neath from October 2024. There was a piece on the fantastic Amy's Crypt website that I would highly recommend checking out. There is so much content on there if you're a general fan of all things spooky. We had a piece on the good old spookyisles.com website by Nia Jones from October 2012. That site never fails to be super useful. And finally, there was a page about the castle on the website landoflegends.wales, which is again such a cool site, definitely one to check out. I truly can't wait to hear what you think about this story. So here's a reminder of all the ways you can get in touch. We are at Things Get Weird Podcast on Instagram and Threads. On TikTok, our handle is at Things Are About to Get Weird. And on Facebook, you can also find us by searching for the podcast name. Over there, you'll find our main page and our private discussion group too. Our email address is thingsgetweirdpodcast@gmail.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, a quick rating or review wherever you're listening would be amazing. It's a fantastic free way to show your support for the show. If you're listening on Spotify, do feel free to leave a comment on the episode page. It is such a fun feature and a fab way to share your thoughts with everyone else listening too. A massive thank you to each and every one of you for joining me today. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll be back with a brand new strange but true tale for you very soon. So until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep it weird, but the good kind of weird.